Hi, I'm Jeremy, and I'm working on Merchants of the Stars. It's a space traffic control game inspired by an old iOS game called Harbor Master. That game is no longer on the App Store, and I've always thought it would be fun to create something similar. The drag-to-move mechanics are really fun, and I don't see many games that seem similar. In this video, I'm going to cover where I've been, along with the work I've been doing to transform Merchants from merely a toy into a real game. In my previous video, I showed the beginning of the project, including switching from Unity to Godot, and up to creating the basic mechanics of ships docking and delivering cargo. It's been a while since I made that video. Here's a secret. I took a little break from working on the game, because I had some unexpected success with my Pokemon Go YouTube channel, The Excellent Pokédex. Because of this success, I decided to lean into making videos on that channel, and put Merchants on the back burner. Successful YouTube channels are addictive, and I found myself doing better than I ever would have expected. But at some point, I realized that the Excellent Pokédex alone wasn't helping me achieve my goals in life. Even if I reached 100k subscribers, the reason that I'd started it in the first place wasn't to have a huge Pokemon YouTube channel. It was to help my game development journey. While it was, and is, a fun side quest, I decided that at some point I would need to pull back for a while and return to game development. So I set myself the arbitrary goal of 5,000 subscribers and $1,000 of lifetime revenue. And, well, on November 6th, it became obvious that with my already published videos, my channel would coast to that goal. So, even though I had plenty more video ideas, I decided to switch gears right then and start devoting most of my time to working on the game. Actually, random aside, I just noticed that my last major commit to the project was November 6th, 2023. So I accidentally restarted work on the exact 1-year anniversary of stopping it. By the way, it's super weird to refer to a 5,000 subscriber channel as merely a side quest, and I'm very grateful to all of my viewers over there. I never expected the channel to do as well as it did, and now I feel a little bit like the dog who actually caught the car. I do plan to continue uploading to the Excellent Pokédex, but on a slower schedule than I used to. So now we're back here, on my 20 subscriber channel. This was a rational decision, right? Anyway, please subscribe to keep up with my progress. Also, please wishlist my game on Steam if it seems interesting to you. Links in the description. But let's talk about the game, and some of the improvements and additions I've made since starting to work on it again. With the release of my previous devlog, I uploaded a playable version of my prototype to itch.io. But there was something really wrong with the web version. Every time ships collided and an explosion occurred, there was a noticeable pause. After some debugging, I figured out that this was caused by a shader being loaded every time an explosion occurred. I fixed this with some dumb hack, and the jank was gone. Once I fixed this obvious issue, the next thing to tackle was pretty unclear. While it was already a fun toy, the game was really far from, well, a game. Most obviously, it had only a single level, no scoring system, no consequences for ships colliding, very little content, and so many more missing things. My overall goal was to keep the project small and try to get something releasable within weeks or months, rather than years. I knew from Harbor Master that for this genre, a huge amount of content wasn't really necessary. That game only had a small amount of content, and mostly subsisted on its inherently fun basic gameplay. The main thing for my game was to make it an actual game from end to end, and then iterate from there. To achieve that goal, I had a few basic thoughts. First, I'm not worrying too much about polished and consistent art. For now, I'm using whatever decent-looking free art I can find online. The plan is to replace it with more consistent art once I've nailed down the game elements that I intend to keep. As a terrible artist myself, I'm not quite sure how I'll do that, but that's a problem for future me. Second, I'm trying to keep things simple and small. I have a ton of ideas about directions the game could go, but I'm consciously trying to avoid scope creep, and for most decisions, do the simplest possible thing. I'm hoping to allow the basic fun of the tap and drag concept to carry most of the weight of making the game fun. But even the smallest game has a ton of things to do, and I felt overwhelmed by the choice. Looking to gain some traction, I randomly decided to tackle the first thing that came to mind. It definitely wasn't the most important thing to do for the game, but the idea of adding black holes to the game had been bouncing around my head for a while. Black holes fit the theme well, and would provide an interesting obstacle for the player to avoid. After finding a really cool pixel art black hole generator, I added the feature. Basically, If ships get too close to the event horizon, then the black hole sucks them in.
Gravitational anomaly detected. Unable to take evasive action.
There's probably something more interesting or physically accurate you could do, like having some curved space or some noticeable gravity outside of the event horizon, but I decided to stick with the simplest approach for now. Something that my game changes from the Harbor Master formula is adding moving and rotating docks. My testing with the rotating space station proved to me that it's fun to deal with a moving target, and having the station orbit another object provides an extra level of movement that seems like it might be interesting. But traffic control games have an inherent limitation. Everything in the game has to be visible at all times, so panning around the play area like an RTS is not possible. If you can't see all ships at all times, then you can't anticipate collisions and take action to avoid them. Because of this limitation, the new level concept didn't quite work at first. The screen was too small for a central black hole and an orbiting station to be displayed at the same time. To make it work, I had to make it possible to zoom out, so the level could show more. With the addition of per level zoom setting, I was able to try out my black hole station concept, and it was pretty neat. But I soon discovered a problem. I want this game to work not only on desktops, but also on phones. While playtesting it on a small iPhone, a playtester found that the game elements felt extremely small at the zoom level required for the black hole station, and it was difficult to accurately tap and control ships. After trying it, I agreed. The game simply has to be more zoomed in to work well on small phones. I did make a couple of small changes to improve the situation though. First, I made the interactable area for each ship much larger, so you don't need to be as accurate when selecting ships. Second, I added a circle indicator that shows when you've successfully selected a ship. While these changes improved things, I'm still not quite sure how to completely fix this issue, and it's something I'll be working on as I continue to figure out level design. I haven't given up on the orbit idea yet, but I think I'll need to rethink it a bit. In the interest of not getting stuck, I decided to leave that challenge for another day, and another devlog. After adding in black holes, I felt that I had relearned the code base well enough to focus my efforts on the next most important task, turning merchants into an actual game. Most importantly, this meant adding win and loss conditions for each level, as well as adding level-to-level progression. In the spirit of reaching a minimum viable game as quickly as possible, I decided to keep these game and level mechanics as simple and obvious as possible. First, this meant consequences for failure. The simplest approach? Make the level end when ships get destroyed, such as by crashing or getting sucked into a black hole. Second, I needed some form of score. I decided to call your score profit and increment it by 1,000 for every piece of cargo delivered. I've heard that using extra zeros in game scores is a good psychological trick to make players feel better about their progress. I also have this vague idea to make the world of the game a kind of hyper-capitalist dystopia, and making the main score metric profit seems to fit well with this. Finally, levels needed a goal. Interestingly, Harbor Master levels don't really have a goal other than maximum score, and games only end with a loss. But personally, I prefer games that present a specific challenge and actually end at some point, so I decided to take a different direction. The most obvious goal is to reach some profit target, so I made each level have a profit goal. For example, if the goal is 10,000 profit, then you need to make 10 cargo deliveries to win. Once you do, the game pauses and allows you to proceed to the next level, but you also have the option to keep going and achieve a high score in the current level. I'm not sure if I'll keep this system, but I feel like it strikes a good balance for now. It allows the player to win and progress through the game, but also allows endless play with a high score. Along with the win and loss conditions, I added a save system that keeps track of your high scores for each level, so that it persists between game sessions. With the level lifecycle out of the way, I next needed to think about the game lifecycle, or the way that you progress from level to level. Once again, I decided to start with the most straightforward system possible. Once you beat level 1, you advance to level 2, and so on. I added a next button to the end game screen that is shown when you win, and automatically advances you to the next level. I also added a level selection menu. After a few tries, I settled on this version that shows a panel for each level including its title, high score, goal score, and a preview picture. You can navigate through the levels using the arrows on the left and right. With the basic level and game flow done, I started thinking about how to make the levels more fun. So far, they had extremely basic logic. Basically, every 5 to 15 seconds, I would spawn a new ship at a random point along the edge of the screen. With this system, the difficulty quickly ramped up from very easy to very hard, especially if you were a bit slow at dealing with cargo. I decided on a basic fix for this, which was to slowly increase the difficulty over time. I stuck with randomly spawning ships every 5 to 15 seconds, but also added a max number of ships allowed on the screen at once. This max starts at 3, but increases by 1 every 30 seconds. This makes the difficulty increase a little bit slower, making it easier at the beginning, but it also causes the game to become increasingly difficult as you play, making it less boring to play for a long time. The exact parameters of this difficulty increase will definitely need some tweaking, and will vary from level to level, but I think the basic idea is solid. Next, I felt like I needed to make the game a little more varied and interesting. One obvious idea for the space theme was to add asteroids. I found some asteroid art online. It kind of looks like poop. Space poop. But that's okay. It'll do for now. I added the asteroids and made it so ships explode if they collide with them. While adding the asteroids was in itself pretty easy, I did encounter a couple of game design problems that needed fixing. First, there was now a lot more danger for ships, and it was hard visually to keep track of everything going on. So I added a red circle to each ship that shows up if it's too close to another ship or asteroid. Second, by playtesting with asteroids, I discovered an annoying issue. If an asteroid wanders into the path of an undocking ship, there's nothing the player can do to avoid hitting it. This is frustrating, and if I were to leave it like this, just plain bad design. It wasn't immediately obvious how to fix it. My initial thought was to alter how asteroids spawn, so that they only take paths that don't go too near the station. But this seemed kind of difficult, not very flexible for other levels, and overall would make asteroids less interesting since they'd be stuck on the outside of the map. So I made a decision. Instead of taking the simplest path, I would make an entirely new system to deal with this seemingly tiny design problem. That's right, I added a station defense laser. I grabbed some free laser cannon art, and then spent a day or two implementing the whole system. To match the ship controls, I wanted the laser cannon to use tap and drag mechanics, so I decided that to control it, you would have to tap the station and then drag to the asteroid you wanted to shoot. I decided to give the defense laser a fairly short range, so it could only destroy asteroids that were close enough to cause problems for undocking ships. This would ensure that you would still have to actively avoid asteroids at the edge of the screen, rather than just blasting them. For such a randomly conceived system, I think it actually works pretty well. It not only solves the design issue, but it's pretty satisfying in its own right. For testing, I made an asteroid turkey shoot level that omits ships completely and just spawns a ton of asteroids to destroy, and it's actually pretty fun. Overall, the station defense laser adds an extra thing to manage, and in a game all about frantically managing a bunch of things at once, I think it fits in well. Along with these gameplay changes, I also added a basic settings menu with music and sound controls. And importantly, I figured out how to build the game for iOS and Android, and got initial beta versions up on the Play and App stores for my testers to try. Finally, I put up a basic Steam page. The common wisdom seems to be that you should do this as early as possible, so even though I still have placeholder art and relatively limited gameplay, I thought I should go ahead and create one. Please drop a wish list. Links in the description. That's all the progress I have for now. Overall, I'm really encouraged by the progress I was able to make in about 2 weeks since restarting work on the project. There's still a lot to do in terms of adding content, but it finally starts to feel like this is actually a game, and not just a toy. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you for the next one.